The rifle's weight pressed against Elena Vasquez's shoulder like an old friend's hand, steady and familiar, even as the storm clouds gathered overhead with the promise of chaos. 5,400 meters. The number carved itself into the salt-thick air of the naval proving grounds, where the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly beyond the cliffs, and where careers were made or shattered with the squeeze of a trigger. Impossible, Admiral Richardson had declared 3 hours earlier, his weathered face creasing into lines of dismissal as he studied the proposed shot through his wire-rimmed glasses. The word had echoed through the observation tower like a verdict, bouncing off the reinforced glass windows that overlooked the testing range where Elena now lay prone, her breathing measured against the rhythm of distant waves. No sniper in naval history has made a confirmed kill at that distance, not from a moving platform, not in these conditions. But Elena had heard impossible before. She'd heard it whispered in the corridors of the Naval Academy when she'd been the only woman in her advanced marksmanship program. She'd heard it shouted over the roar of helicopter rotors in Afghanistan, where her spotter, Sergeant Marcus Chen, had become the first person to believe in the impossible alongside her. She'd heard it in the silence that followed her father's funeral, when the honor guard had folded the flag with mechanical precision, while her mother's tears fell like rain on the cemetery grass, and Elena had sworn she would carry on his legacy in the corps he'd loved more than life itself. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of diesel fuel from the naval vessels anchored in the harbor below, mixed with the sharp tang of gunpowder that seemed permanently embedded in the concrete of the firing range. Elena adjusted her position minutely, feeling the familiar burn in her muscles as she maintained the perfect stability that had taken her 15 years to master. Her finger rested beside the trigger guard, patient as stone, while her eye tracked through the scope to the distant target that appeared no larger than a pinprick against the horizon. Marcus lay beside her now, his rangefinder steady despite the tremor she could see in his left hand, a souvenir from Kandahar that he never spoke about, though she'd noticed how he flexed his fingers before every shot, working feeling back into the nerve-damaged digits. "Wind's picking up from the southwest," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the sound of the observation deck behind them, where 37 naval officers and defense contractors waited to witness either history or failure. Temperature dropped 2 degrees. "I see it," Elena replied, though her words were lost in the growing murmur of skepticism from their audience. Through her peripheral vision, she could see Admiral Richardson checking his watch with the impatience of a man who had already written his report, already prepared his explanation for why this demonstration had been a waste of the Navy's time and resources. Beside him stood Dr. Sarah Kim, the civilian ballistics expert whose calculations had made this shot theoretically possible, her tablet clutched against her chest like armor as she watched the wind flags dance with increasing violence. The target itself was a marvel of engineering precision, a steel plate 18 inches square, mounted on a hydraulic system that could simulate the movement of an enemy vessel at sea. But it wasn't the target that made the shot legendary in its ambition, it was the platform. Elena wasn't firing from solid ground or a stable building. She lay on the deck of the USS Defiance, a guided missile destroyer that rocked gently in the harbor swells, its steel hull rising and falling with the predictable rhythm that marked the difference between a difficult shot and an impossible one. 30 seconds until the firing window closes, called Lieutenant Commander Torres from the ship's bridge, her voice crackling through the comm system. Elena had requested the specific timing, had studied the weather patterns and ocean conditions for 3 weeks to identify the precise moment when wind, waves, and atmospheric pressure would align in her favor. 30 seconds to prove that the impossible was simply another word for untested. Elena's heartbeat slowed, entering the meditative state that her instructors at Quantico had called the zone, that place beyond conscious thought, where mathematics became instinct, where physics transformed into poetry. Her breathing deepened, each exhale carrying away another fraction of tension until she felt herself become part of the rifle, part of the ship, part of the vast equation that connected her position to the distant target through 5,400 meters of turbulent air. The backstory of this moment stretched through years of preparation and doubt. Elena had grown up in the shadow of Naval Base San Diego, where her father, Gunnery Sergeant Roberto Vasquez, had taught her to shoot on weekends at the civilian range off base. Marksmanship is 90% patience, 10% skill, he had told her when she was 12, helping her adjust the sights on the .22 rifle that seemed enormous in her small hands. Anyone can learn to hit a target, but only a true shooter can hit the target that matters, when it matters, under conditions that would break a lesser person. Those words had carried her through the academy, where her classmates had initially treated her presence as a curiosity rather than a threat. They'd learned otherwise during her first qualifying round, when she'd outshot every member of her class and set a new academy record that still stood 8 years later. But records were one thing, combat was another. Afghanistan had taught her that the difference between theoretical excellence and practical application was measured not in points or scores, but in the lives of the Marines who depended on her ability to place a bullet exactly where it needed to be, regardless of heat, exhaustion, fear, with the knowledge that failure meant death. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Marcus had been with her for most of that journey, first as her instructor at Scout Sniper School, then as her spotter through 3 deployments, where they'd compiled a record that earned them both commendations and, more importantly, the quiet respect of their peers. He'd been the one to suggest this demonstration, recognizing that Elena's unique combination of technical skill and intuitive understanding of ballistics could solve a problem the Navy had been wrestling with for decades: how to provide precision long-range support from naval platforms in contested environments, where traditional air support might not be available. 10 seconds, Taurus announced, and Elena felt the ship rise on a larger swell, the subtle shift in angle that would normally throw off any conventional shooting solution. But she had trained for this, had spent months learning to read the ship's movement like a language, understanding how the hull's pitch and yaw translated into the complex three-dimensional mathematics of extreme-range ballistics. Dr. Kim's calculations had been elegant in their complexity, accounting not just for wind and distance, but for the Coriolis effect at this latitude, the slight variation in air density caused by the marine layer, even the gravitational anomaly created by the massive naval shipyard to the south. But calculations were theoretical. Elena's finger on the trigger was real. The crowd behind her had grown quiet, the earlier skepticism replaced by the kind of tense anticipation that accompanies moments when history balanced on the edge of possibility. Admiral Richardson had stopped checking his watch. Dr. Kim had lowered her tablet, her eyes fixed on Elena's still form. Even the seabirds seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, their cries fading to leave only the sound of wind and water against the hull. Elena's world narrowed to the crosshairs in her scope, where the distant target appeared as little more than a geometrical abstraction against the gray horizon. But she could see it in her mind's eye, 18 inches of hardened steel waiting 5,400 meters away, a distance that represented not just a technical challenge, but a fundamental question about the limits of human capability. 10 seconds, Taurus announced, and Elena felt the ship rise on a larger swell, the subtle shift in angle that would normally throw off any conventional shooting solution. But she had trained for this, had spent months learning to read the ship's movement like a language, understanding how the hull's pitch and yaw translated into the complex three-dimensional mathematics of extreme-range ballistics. Dr. Kim's calculations had been elegant in their complexity, accounting not just for wind and distance, but for the Coriolis effect at this latitude, the slight variation in air density caused by the marine layer, even the gravitational anomaly created by the massive naval shipyard to the south. But calculations were theoretical. Elena's finger on the trigger was real. The crowd behind her had grown quiet, the earlier skepticism replaced by the kind of tense anticipation that accompanies moments when history balanced on the edge of possibility. Admiral Richardson had stopped checking his watch. Dr. Kim had lowered her tablet, her eyes fixed on Elena's still form. Even the seabirds seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, their cries fading to leave only the sound of wind and water against the hull. Elena's world narrowed to the crosshairs in her scope, where the distant target appeared as little more than a geometrical abstraction against the gray horizon. But she could see it in her mind's eye, 18 inches of hardened steel waiting 5,400 meters away, a distance that represented not just a technical challenge, but a fundamental question about the limits of human capability. Elena Vasquez had never intended to become the woman who made impossible shots look routine. Growing up in the modest duplex on Coronado Island, where the sound of military jets provided the constant soundtrack to daily life, her dreams had been disappointingly ordinary. Marine biology, perhaps, or maybe teaching high school chemistry like her mother had been before. The Navy transferred her father to San Diego and changed everything about their carefully planned civilian lives. The morning routine had been sacred in the Vasquez household. Elena's mother, Carmen, would rise at 0500 to prepare breakfast for Roberto before his shift at the base, while Elena practiced violin in her bedroom, the melancholy strains of Bach floating through the thin walls like a prayer for normalcy. But by 0630, when her father returned from his morning run along the beach, the house transformed from peaceful domesticity into something that resembled a gentle military operation. Precision without harshness, discipline tempered by love. "Mija," Roberto would say, settling into his chair at the kitchen table where Carmen had arranged his coffee exactly as he preferred it, black, with a single cube of sugar that he never used but always requested. "Tell me something you learned yesterday that you didn't know the day before." It was their daily ritual, this sharing of knowledge, and Elena cherished these moments when her father's attention focused entirely on her, his dark eyes crinkling with genuine interest as she recounted her discoveries from school or books or the nature documentaries that fascinated her. She told him about ocean currents and tidal patterns, about the migration habits of California gray whales, about the complex ecosystem of kelp forests that swayed in the underwater currents just miles from their front door. What she didn't tell him, couldn't find words to express, was how the very steadiness of their routine made her feel simultaneously grateful and trapped. Elena loved her parents with the fierce devotion of an only child, but she also sensed that their careful stability was built around accommodating her father's military career. Their civilian dreams perpetually deferred to the demands of duty and deployment schedules that could change without warning. The contradiction lived in her chest like a physical weight. Pride in her father's service, warring with resentment at the way military life seemed to hollow out space for everything else. When Roberto spoke about his Marines with the reverence other men reserved for family, Elena felt both admiration and a strange jealousy, as though she were competing with the Corps for her father's devotion. And losing. These feelings intensified during her high school years, when other families seemed to revolve around college applications and career planning, while the Vasquez household maintained its careful focus on the present moment, as though planning too far ahead might somehow jinx Roberto's safe return from his next deployment. Carmen encouraged Elena's academic achievements with quiet pride, but there was always an undertone of anxiety, a mother's fear that success might carry her daughter too far from the protective orbit of military life. Elena's relationship with precision began accidentally, during a weekend camping trip to the mountains east of San Diego when she was 14. Roberto had brought along his personal rifle, a civilian version of the weapon he'd qualified with in the Marines, intending to teach Elena basic firearm safety and perhaps bag a deer if the opportunity arose. But when she'd settled into the shooting position he'd shown her, something profound and inexplicable had happened. The rifle had felt natural in her hands, as though it were an extension of her own body rather than an alien tool. Her breathing had synchronized automatically with the weapon's natural rhythm, and when she'd squeezed the trigger for the first time, the distant tin can had exploded in a shower of metallic fragments that seemed to surprise everyone except Elena herself. She had known with absolute certainty that the bullet would go exactly where she'd intended it to go. Roberto had stared at the destroyed target for a long moment, before turning to his daughter with an expression she'd never seen before. Not quite pride, not quite wonder, but something that combined both, with a trace of recognition, as though he were seeing a part of himself reflected in her steady hands and unblinking eyes. "Natural talent is dangerous, mija," he'd said quietly, as he helped her clean the rifle as the mountain shadows lengthened around their campsite. "It makes you think the world owes you something, or that success should come easily. But real skill is built on discipline, on doing the difficult things correctly, even when no one is watching, especially when no one is watching." That weekend had planted a seed that grew slowly through her remaining high school years. Elena began joining Roberto for his visits to the civilian shooting range, initially as a way to spend time with her father, but gradually developing her own relationship with marksmanship that existed independent of his guidance. She discovered that the meditative focus required for precision shooting provided relief from the social complexities of teenage life, a sanctuary where her worth was measured in objective terms that couldn't be influenced by politics or popularity. But the skill also created new contradictions. Elena's improving marksmanship drew attention from her father's military colleagues, who began suggesting that she consider military service as a pathway to advanced training and competition opportunities. The idea terrified Carmen, who had spent 18 years watching her husband deployed to increasingly dangerous assignments, and who couldn't imagine voluntarily sending her daughter into the same life of controlled chaos and perpetual readiness for violence. "The military isn't a game, Elena," her mother had said one evening after Roberto had mentioned the possibility of Elena attending a summer marksmanship camp sponsored by the Marine Corps. "It's not like your competitions or your practice sessions. In the military, shooting means ending lives. It means being responsible for death in ways that will change who you are forever." Carmen's words had forced Elena to confront the ethical dimensions of her emerging talent. She spent sleepless nights wrestling with questions that had no clean answers. Was there moral justification for developing skills that were fundamentally designed for killing? Could precision shooting be divorced from its military applications, treated purely as an intellectual and physical challenge? What did it mean that she felt most at peace when preparing to send a bullet across hundreds of meters of space with lethal accuracy? The answers came gradually, through conversations with Roberto that stretched late into the night as they cleaned weapons and discussed the philosophy of military service. Her father helped her understand that marksmanship, at its highest level, was about protection rather than aggression, the ability to neutralize threats to innocent people from distances that kept other service members safe from retaliation. "A sniper's job isn't to seek out targets," Roberto had explained, his hands moving with practiced efficiency as he field-stripped his rifle for cleaning. "A sniper's job is to be ready when the targeting is necessary, to make the shots that prevent larger conflicts, to serve as a deterrent that keeps wars from starting in the first place. The best snipers, the ones who sleep well at night, are the ones whose reputation prevents them from having to shoot at all." This philosophy sustained Elena through her decision to attend the Naval Academy, where her marksmanship abilities earned her recognition but also isolation. Her classmates respected her skills but struggled to relate to her singular focus on precision shooting, especially once it became clear that her talent exceeded that of most instructors. Elena found herself caught between worlds, too military for her civilian friends back home, too specialized for easy integration with her Naval Academy peers who are preparing for careers in surface warfare, aviation, and submarine operations. The loneliness was most acute during leave periods, when she returned to Coronado to find that her childhood friendships had atrophied under the pressure of divergent life paths. Her former classmates were navigating college social scenes and internship opportunities, while Elena was learning to calculate wind drift and atmospheric effects on long-range ballistics. The conversations became strained, filled with polite inquiries about academy life that couldn't bridge the growing gap between their experiences. Marcus Chen had been the first person to understand Elena's relationship with shooting as something more complex than simple technical proficiency. When he'd arrived at Quantico as her instructor in advanced scout sniper school, he'd recognized immediately that her talents required guidance rather than traditional instruction. Marcus had served 3 tours in Iraq and understood the psychological weight of precision killing in ways that academy instructors couldn't match. "Shooting is the easy part," he told her during their first training session, watching as she consistently grouped shots within a quarter inch at 200 meters. The difficult part is learning to live with the moments when you choose not to shoot, when you have a clear target but hold fire because the situation doesn't justify the kill. The difficult part is understanding that your skills carry responsibility, that every round you fire represents a decision that will follow you for the rest of your life. Under Marcus's guidance, Elena learned to integrate her technical abilities with tactical judgment, developing the psychological resilience necessary for combat deployment. But she also began to understand that her pursuit of perfection in marksmanship was, at least partially, an attempt to create control in a life that had been shaped by the unpredictable demands of military service. If she could hit any target under any conditions, perhaps she could protect herself and others from the chaos that had defined her childhood. The contradiction between seeking control and accepting military duty created persistent tension in Elena's daily life. She maintained routines that bordered on obsessive, rising at 04:30 for physical training, following the same breakfast sequence her mother had prepared throughout her childhood, cleaning her weapons with the meticulous care Roberto had demonstrated. But she also forced herself to embrace uncertainty, volunteering for training exercises that tested her adaptability and resilience under unpredictable conditions. Her apartment near the base reflected these contradictions. One wall displayed her marksmanship awards and commendations, while the opposite wall held photographs of marine life and coastal landscapes that reminded her of childhood dreams she'd abandoned for military service. Her bookshelf contained technical manuals on ballistics and weapon systems, alongside marine biology textbooks she still read for pleasure, maintaining a connection to the career path she'd rejected but never forgotten. Elena's romantic relationships suffered under the weight of her dedication to perfection. The few men who'd attempted to build serious connections with her had eventually grown frustrated with her unwillingness to compromise her training schedule or accept good enough as a standard for anything that mattered. She'd tried to explain that precision shooting required constant practice, that skills degraded rapidly without daily maintenance, but her explanations had sounded like excuses, even to herself. The truth was more complicated. Elena had discovered that the pursuit of perfect accuracy provided emotional satisfaction that she'd never found in human relationships. People were messy and unpredictable, their motivations shifting without warning, their promises contingent on circumstances beyond her control. But ballistics followed immutable laws, and bullets traveled to precisely where physics and skill combined to send them. In a world where so much seemed arbitrary and chaotic, marksmanship offered the comfort of absolute cause and effect. This realization troubled her, suggesting that her talents might be symptoms of emotional dysfunction rather than gifts to be cultivated. During quiet evenings in her apartment, Elena sometimes wondered if her pursuit of precision shooting was actually an elaborate form of avoidance, a way to postpone the more challenging work of building genuine intimacy with other people. But then morning would arrive, and she would return to the range, settling into the familiar ritual of breathing and aiming and squeezing the trigger with mechanical precision. And in those moments, when the distant target exploded exactly as intended, Elena felt a satisfaction so pure and complete that all philosophical questions dissolved into irrelevance. She was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do, regardless of the personal costs or the complexity of her motivations. The phone call from Dr. Kim about the 5,400-meter demonstration had arrived during one of these moments of clarity, when Elena was finishing her daily practice session at the base range. The proposal had seemed almost too perfect, an opportunity to demonstrate the ultimate expression of her skills while contributing to legitimate military research into extended-range precision capabilities. But as Elena had listened to Dr. Kim's technical explanation of the shot's requirements, She'd felt the familiar flutter of anxiety that accompanied any situation where her performance would be scrutinized by people who understood the difference between very good and truly exceptional. The demonstration wouldn't just test her marksmanship abilities, it would validate or challenge her entire identity as someone who could accomplish the impossible through perfect execution of learned skills. Standing now on the deck of the USS Defiance, Elena felt the weight of all those contradictions pressing against her consciousness. The daughter who'd chosen military service despite her mother's fears, the perfectionist who'd found peace in an occupation designed for violence, the woman who'd sacrificed conventional relationships for the solitary pursuit of absolute precision. The rifle in her hands carried not just the potential energy of the cartridge in its chamber, but the accumulated force of every choice she'd made to become the person capable of attempting this shot.
The bullet's flight time across 5,400 meters would be approximately 7 seconds. 7 seconds during which Elena's professional reputation, the Navy's research program, and the fundamental assumptions about human capability in precision shooting would hang suspended in the salt air above the Pacific Ocean. But in those 7 seconds, Elena lived through what felt like hours of accumulated tension that had been building for the 3 weeks since Admiral Richardson had first declared the shot impossible. The resistance had begun immediately after Dr. Kim's initial presentation to the Naval Research Advisory Committee. Elena remembered sitting in the sterile conference room at the Pentagon, her dress blues crisp and uncomfortable, while 37 senior officers and defense contractors listened to Dr. Kim explain the theoretical foundations for extreme long-range precision engagement from naval platforms. The PowerPoint slides had been elegant, ballistic trajectories rendered in clean mathematical curves, atmospheric modeling data displayed in colorful charts, historical precedents for paradigm shifts in military technology. Admiral Richardson had waited until Dr. Kim finished her presentation before delivering his verdict with the casual authority of a man accustomed to ending conversations with finality. "Impossible," he'd said, not bothering to look up from his tablet where he had been taking notes throughout the presentation. "No sniper in naval history has achieved consistent accuracy beyond 3,000 meters from a moving platform. The variables are too numerous, the margin for error too small. We're not funding a carnival trick." The dismissal had stung Elena more than she'd expected, partly because Richardson's tone had carried the implicit suggestion that her abilities were somehow fraudulent, a carefully constructed illusion that would collapse under rigorous testing. But the Admiral's rejection had also awakened something combative in her nature, a stubbornness inherited from her father that refused to accept limitations imposed by other people's imaginations. Dr. Kim had requested a private meeting with Elena after the committee session, leading her to a small coffee shop near the Pentagon where they could speak without fear of being overheard by military personnel, who might have opinions about their conversation. Elena had expected technical questions about her training and experience, but Dr. Kim had surprised her with inquiries that were more philosophical than practical. "Tell me why you believe this shot is possible," Dr. Kim had said, stirring sugar into her coffee with the methodical precision Elena had come to associate with scientific minds. "Tell me why you personally believe you can succeed where others would fail." Elena had struggled to articulate an answer that didn't sound like arrogance or self-delusion. How could she explain the bone-deep certainty that had guided her marksmanship career, the intuitive understanding that distinguished possible from impossible in ways that transcended calculation? "I've never attempted a shot that I wasn't confident I could make, not in training, not in combat. If I thought this was beyond my capabilities, I wouldn't be sitting here." "But you've never attempted a shot at this distance," Dr. Kim had pressed. "You're extrapolating from shorter ranges, assuming that your skills will scale linearly. What if they don't? What if there's a threshold beyond which human reaction time and sensory perception become inadequate regardless of training?" The question had haunted Elena through the following weeks of preparation, particularly during the technical briefings where Dr. Kim's research team had explained the complex environmental factors that would affect the bullet's trajectory. Wind patterns at different altitudes, temperature gradients in the marine layer, even the rotation of the Earth itself, all would influence the projectile's path in ways that required mathematical modeling beyond Elena's comprehension. Lieutenant Commander Torres had been the first military officer to support the demonstration, recognizing its potential applications for naval special operations in contested environments where traditional air support might be unavailable. But Torres's enthusiasm had created new pressures, transforming the shot from a simple test of Elena's abilities into a proof of concept for an entire tactical doctrine that could reshape how the Navy approaches precision engagement. If you succeed, Torres had explained during one of their planning sessions, we're looking at fundamental changes in how we equip and deploy maritime special operations teams. The ability to provide precision fires at extended range from naval platforms could eliminate the need
for forward observers in hostile territory, reduce risk to our personnel, and provide commanders with response options that don't currently exist. The stakes had risen further when Captain Morrison, the commanding officer of the USS Defiance, had volunteered his ship for the demonstration. Morrison was known throughout the fleet as an officer who collected impossible missions the way other people collected stamps, and his involvement had attracted attention from senior Navy leadership who wanted to witness what they expected to be either a breakthrough or a spectacular failure. Elena's training regimen had intensified as the demonstration date approached. She spent hours each day on the ship, learning to read its movement patterns, understanding how the hull's pitch and yaw translated into the complex three-dimensional mathematics required for extreme-range shooting. Marcus had modified traditional spotter protocols to account for the additional variables created by the maritime environment, developing new techniques for calculating wind drift and atmospheric effects that had never been tested under operational conditions. But the most difficult challenge hadn't been technical, it had been psychological. As news of the demonstration spread through the military community, Elena found herself subjected to levels of scrutiny that felt both invasive and unfair. Officers who had never shown interest in her work suddenly wanted detailed explanations of her training methods and combat experience. Defense contractors requested meetings to discuss potential equipment modifications that might improve her performance. Military journalists submitted interview requests that would have transformed her into a public figure she had no desire to become. The attention created pressure that Elena struggled to process. She'd always performed best in anonymous competence, executing difficult missions without fanfare or recognition beyond the small community of professionals who understood the complexity of her work. But the 5,400-meter shot had become a symbol of something larger than individual achievement. It represented the military's willingness to push beyond conventional limits, to embrace technological and tactical innovations that could provide strategic advantages in an increasingly complex global security environment. Admiral Richardson's opposition had hardened as the demonstration date approached. During a heated exchange at the weekly research review meeting, he'd questioned not just the shot's feasibility, but Elena's motivations for attempting it. "This isn't about advancing military capabilities," he said, his voice carrying the authority of decades in command positions. "This is about personal ego, about a sniper who wants to set records regardless of the cost to military resources and personnel safety." The accusation was unfair and untrue, but it had found its target with the precision Elena brought to her own work. She'd spent sleepless nights wondering if Richardson was correct, if her pursuit of the impossible shot was motivated more by pride than by genuine commitment to military innovation. The self-doubt had affected her training performance, creating incremental decreases in accuracy that Marcus had noticed but been too tactful to mention directly. Dr. Kim had provided emotional support during this period of uncertainty, helping Elena understand that ambitious goals naturally attracted criticism from people whose own limitations prevented them from imagining success. "Richardson represents institutional conservatism," she had explained during one of their technical review sessions. "His job is to prevent the military from wasting resources on impractical experiments.
Your job is to demonstrate that his assumptions about what's impractical might be incorrect. The psychological preparation had been as important as the technical training. Elena worked with a military psychologist to develop mental techniques for managing performance anxiety under extreme scrutiny. She learned visualization methods that allowed her to mentally rehearse the shot sequence hundreds of times, programming her unconscious reflexes to execute perfectly even under conditions that might overwhelm her conscious decision-making processes. Marcus had been invaluable during this preparation, providing the steady competence that allowed Elena to focus entirely on her own performance without worrying about equipment malfunctions or environmental miscalculations.
But even Marcus had moments of doubt that he'd tried unsuccessfully to conceal from Elena. She'd caught him reviewing ballistic calculation tables with an intensity that suggested anxiety rather than routine preparation. And she'd overheard him making phone calls to former colleagues where he discussed contingency plans for dealing with failure that would be witnessed by senior military leadership. The night before the demonstration, Elena had called her parents from her quarters aboard the USS Defiance. Carmen had been characteristically worried, expressing concerns about the physical risks of attempting an unprecedented shot from an unstable platform in challenging weather conditions. But Roberto had understood immediately what the demonstration meant for Elena's career and for military innovation more broadly. "Mija," he'd said, his voice carrying across the phone connection with the authority that had shaped Elena's understanding of duty and commitment. "Tomorrow, you will attend something that no one has ever achieved. Regardless of the outcome, you will have pushed the boundaries of what people believe is possible. That is what Marines do. That is what your training has prepared you for. Trust in your skills, trust in your preparation, and let the results speak for themselves." The morning of the demonstration had arrived with weather conditions that bordered on acceptable but fell far short of ideal. Wind gusts up to 20 knots, intermittent cloud cover that affected visibility, ocean swells that created more ship movement than Elena would have preferred for a precision shot of this magnitude. Admiral Richardson had suggested postponing the demonstration until conditions improved, but Elena had recognized the suggestion as another attempt to undermine her confidence and had insisted on proceeding as scheduled. The assembled observers had gathered in the ship's observation areas with the mix of anticipation and skepticism that accompanied any attempt to achieve something unprecedented. Elena could feel their expectations pressing against her consciousness as she settled into the shooting position Marcus had prepared, the rifle's bipod legs adjusted for the precise height and angle that their calculations indicated would be necessary for success. Dr. Kim had made final adjustments to her atmospheric modeling software, incorporating real-time weather data from monitoring stations positioned between the ship and the target. The results had been encouraging but not definitive. Conditions were within acceptable parameters for the shot, but success would require perfect execution of techniques that had never been tested under these specific circumstances. Elena's breathing had settled into the meditative rhythm she'd learned to associate with precision shooting, each exhale carrying away another fraction of tension until she felt herself become part of the rifle, part of the ship, part of the vast mathematical equation that would determine where the bullet traveled across 5,400 meters of turbulent air and ocean spray. The target itself had been positioned with GPS precision on a floating platform that simulated the movement characteristics of an enemy vessel. 18 inches of hardened steel, mounted on hydraulics that created realistic motion patterns, waiting in the distance like a challenge to everything Elena believed about the relationship between skill and impossibility. Admiral Richardson had taken his position among the observers with the resigned expression of a man preparing to witness failure he'd predicted and tried to prevent. But Elena had noticed something else in his demeanor. A subtle tension that suggested he might actually want her to succeed despite his public skepticism about the shot's feasibility. As the firing window approached, Elena felt the familiar transformation that preceded her most challenging shots.
The noise and distraction of the observation deck faded into background silence. Her vision narrowed to the scope's field of view. Her body settled into perfect stability, despite the ship's movement beneath her. This was the moment she'd trained for, the culmination of skills developed through years of disciplined practice and refined through combat experience where failure meant consequences far more serious than professional embarrassment. The crosshairs found the distant target, and Elena began the final sequence of adjustments that would determine whether impossible was just another word for untested, or whether Admiral Richardson's skepticism had been justified all along. The bullet left Elena's rifle at 2,800 feet per second, carrying with it the kinetic energy of months of preparation, years of training, and a lifetime of disciplined pursuit of precision that had led to this singular moment of truth. For 6.8 seconds, the projectile carved its path through complex atmospheric conditions above the Pacific Ocean, following the ballistic trajectory that Dr. Kim's computers had predicted and Elena's intuition had confirmed. In those 6.8 seconds, Elena experienced the strange temporal distortion that accompanied her most challenging shots, time dilating until each heartbeat felt like minutes, each breath expanding to contain entire lifetimes of possibility and doubt. Through her scope, she could see the target clearly despite the distance, the 18 inches of steel that would determine whether her career was defined by breakthrough achievement or spectacular failure. The bullet struck the target with a metallic ring that carried clearly across the water, audible even above the wind and ocean sounds that had provided constant background noise throughout the morning. But the sound of impact was followed by something Elena hadn't expected: complete silence from the observation deck, as though 37 military officers and defense contractors had simultaneously forgotten how to breathe. Marcus was the first to react, his rangefinder confirming what Elena already knew with absolute certainty. "Target hit," he said quietly, his voice carrying none of the excitement she might have expected from a man who'd just witnessed history. "Center mass, perfect placement." The silence stretched for another few seconds before Admiral Richardson's voice cut through the morning air with uncharacteristic uncertainty. "Confirm the hit," he ordered, though his tone suggested he was hoping for contradiction rather than verification. Dr. Kim's tablet was already displaying telemetry data from the sensors mounted on the target platform. "Confirmed impact," she announced, her scientific composure cracking to reveal genuine amazement. "Bullseye at 5,427 meters. Projectile velocity at impact was consistent with theoretical predictions. All environmental factors performed within calculated parameters." Elena remained motionless in her shooting position, the rifle's weight still pressed against her shoulder as though she were preparing for another shot. But internally, she felt something profound shifting. Not triumph, which she'd expected, but a strange combination of satisfaction and anticlimax. The shot she'd obsessed over for weeks had required less than 7 seconds to execute, and now it was finished, the impossible made routine through the application of physics and skill. Captain Morrison was the first to break the spell of silence that had settled over the observation deck. "Outstanding work, Gunnery Sergeant Vasquez," he said, his voice carrying the kind of professional respect that Elena had learned to value more than enthusiastic praise. "That was the most technically proficient shooting demonstration I've witnessed in 30 years of naval service." But it was Admiral Richardson's response that mattered most, and Elena could see the internal struggle playing out across his weathered features as he processed what he'd just witnessed. For months, he'd been the most vocal opponent of the demonstration, arguing that resources were being wasted on an impossible stunt that would contribute nothing to military readiness or tactical innovation. Now he faced the uncomfortable reality that his fundamental assumptions about human limitations in precision shooting had been proven incorrect by a single bullet fired with perfect accuracy across an impossible distance. The Admiral approached Elena's position slowly, his movements carrying the deliberate weight of a man preparing to acknowledge error in front of subordinates who had witnessed his opposition. Elena finally lifted her head from the scope, meeting Richardson's eyes with the steady gaze that had served her throughout her military career, respectful but non-compromising, willing to accept criticism but not apology for excellence achieved through legitimate means. "Gunnery Sergeant Vasquez," Richardson said, his voice carrying a formality that seemed designed to restore professional distance after the intimacy of shared witness to unprecedented achievement. "I owe you an apology. I allowed my experience with conventional limitations to cloud my judgment about unconventional possibilities. What you've demonstrated here today will change how the Navy approaches precision engagement for maritime platforms." The apology was gracious and appropriate, but Elena could hear the underlying complexity in Richardson's tone, acknowledgement of error mixed with genuine respect for technical achievement, but also a subtle warning that success in one extraordinary circumstance shouldn't be interpreted as license to attempt similar risks without careful consideration of costs and benefits. Dr. Kim was already analyzing the telemetry data from the shot, her tablet displaying real-time information about bullet trajectory, environmental factors, and impact characteristics that would form the foundation for future research into extreme-range precision capabilities.
Atmospheric modeling performed exactly as predicted, she announced to the assembled observers. Wind drift compensation was accurate within 2 centimeters at impact. This confirms that our theoretical framework for extended-range ballistics is sound. But Elena understood that the technical success of the shot was only part of what had been demonstrated. More importantly, she had proven that human capability could exceed conventional expectations when supported by rigorous training, advanced technology, and absolute commitment to precision. The 5,400-meter shot wasn't just a ballistic achievement. It was evidence that military personnel could adapt to challenges that seemed impossible if they were given appropriate resources and preparation time. Marcus began the careful process of securing Elena's rifle, performing the post-shooting inspection routine they'd developed over years of partnership in training and combat situations. But Elena could see something different in his demeanor, not relief, which she'd expected, but a kind of thoughtful satisfaction that suggested he was already thinking about the implications of what they'd accomplished. "How did it feel?" he asked quietly, speaking for Elena's ears alone, while the observers continued their animated discussions about the shot's technical aspects and operational applications. Elena considered the question carefully before responding. "Like every other shot I've made. Routine application of learned skills under challenging but manageable conditions. The only difference was the audience." Marcus smiled at her characteristic understatement, but Elena could see that her answer had provided the confirmation he'd been seeking. The extraordinary shot hadn't changed her fundamental relationship with marksmanship. She remained the same person who approached precision shooting as a technical discipline rather than an exhibition of supernatural ability. Lieutenant Commander Torres was coordinating the collection of data from various monitoring systems positioned around the firing range, but Elena could see her excitement about the operational possibilities that the successful shot had revealed. Torres understood better than most observers how extreme-range precision capabilities could transform tactical planning for naval special operations in contested environments. "Gunnery Sergeant," Torres said, approaching Elena's position with the purposeful stride that characterized her interactions with personnel whose skills she respected. "I'd like to schedule follow-up sessions to test repeatability under various environmental conditions. What you've demonstrated here suggests we need to revise our doctrine for maritime precision engagement." Elena nodded agreement, though privately she wondered whether the Navy fully understood the resources and commitment required to develop extreme-range shooting capabilities across a broader population of personnel. Her own skills represented 15 years of focused development, thousands of hours of practice, and an intuitive understanding of ballistics that couldn't be easily transferred to other shooters through conventional training methods.
The post-shot analysis continued for another hour as Dr. Kim's research team collected detailed information about every aspect of the bullet's trajectory and impact characteristics. Elena remained available for questions and technical discussions, but she found her attention drifting to more philosophical considerations about what the successful shot meant for her career and for military innovation more broadly. Admiral Richardson approached her again as the formal analysis was concluding, this time with an expression that suggested personal rather than professional interest in conversation. "Gunnery Sergeant." He gestured towards a quiet area of the deck where they could speak without being overheard. "May I ask you a personal question?" Elena followed Richardson to the designated spot, curious about what kind of personal inquiry a senior admiral might have for a staff non-commissioned officer who had just demonstrated capabilities that exceeded his understanding of human limitations. "How do you reconcile what you've just accomplished with the reality that extreme precision in killing is fundamentally about ending human lives?" Richardson asked, his voice carrying genuine philosophical curiosity rather than challenge or judgment.
"I've spent 30 years in command positions, and I still struggle with the moral implications of our profession's ultimate purpose." The question struck Elena as refreshingly honest, acknowledging the ethical complexity that surrounded military service in general and precision shooting in particular. She'd wrestled with similar issues throughout her career, especially during combat deployments where her technical skills had direct and irreversible consequences for enemy personnel. "I think about protection rather than killing," Elena replied after considering her response carefully. "Every shot I make, whether in training or combat, is ultimately about protecting people who can't protect themselves. The precision isn't about making killing easier. It's about making protection more effective and reducing collateral damage to innocent civilians." Richardson nodded thoughtfully, though Elena could see he wasn't entirely satisfied with her answer. "But doesn't exceptional ability create exceptional responsibility?" he pressed. "Now that you've demonstrated these capabilities, how do you ensure they're used appropriately? How do you prevent your skills from being employed for purposes that don't align with your ethical framework?" Elena had no easy answer for Richardson's question, which touched on concerns that had troubled her throughout the preparation for the demonstration. Extreme capabilities inevitably attracted attention from people whose motivations might not align with her own understanding of appropriate military applications. "I trust in the chain of command and the oversight systems that govern military operations," she said finally. "My job is to develop and maintain capabilities that serve legitimate military purposes. Other people with broader perspectives and greater authority, make decisions about when and how those capabilities should be employed." Richardson seemed to accept her response, though Elena suspected he was no more satisfied with the institutional answer than she was. The successful demonstration had created new possibilities, but it had also created new responsibilities that neither of them was entirely prepared to address. As the formal activities concluded and the observers began departing the USS Defiance, Elena found herself alone with Marcus and Dr. Kim, reviewing the technical data from the shot and discussing plans for future development of extreme-range precision capabilities. But she could feel the weight of what had been accomplished settling into her consciousness like sediment after turbulent water. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The shot itself had been routine, the application of skills she'd spent years developing under conditions that challenged but didn't exceed her technical capabilities. But the context had transformed routine into historic, individual achievement into institutional breakthrough, personal accomplishment into evidence that conventional understanding of human limitations might be fundamentally incorrect. Dr. Kim was already planning follow-up research based on the successful demonstration, outlining studies that would test the repeatability of extreme-range shooting under various environmental conditions and with different personnel.
Elena listened to the plans with professional interest, but she also recognized that the successful shot had probably changed her life in ways she couldn't yet fully comprehend. "What happens next?" Elena asked Dr. Kim as they watched the last of the observers departing from the ship. "Next, we prove that what you accomplished today wasn't a fluke," Dr. Kim replied, her scientific mind already focused on the systematic validation that would transform a single extraordinary shot into a reproducible military capability. Elena nodded, understanding that her demonstration had only been the beginning of a longer process that would determine whether extreme-range precision shooting could become a standard military capability rather than an exceptional individual achievement. The responsibility felt both exciting and daunting. She had opened a door that couldn't be closed, created possibilities that would need to be explored regardless of her personal preferences about the direction of her career.
Marcus was cleaning the rifle with the methodical care that had characterized his approach to equipment maintenance throughout their partnership. "How do you feel about becoming the standard against which other shooters will be measured?" he asked, echoing Elena's own concerns about the expectations that success would create. "Like I need to keep training," Elena replied, though she recognized that training alone wouldn't be sufficient preparation for the institutional changes that the successful demonstration would inevitably trigger. She had proven that impossible was sometimes just another word for untested, but now she would need to learn how to live with the consequences of that proof. The afternoon sun was beginning to set over the Pacific Ocean, casting long shadows across the deck of the USS Defiance as Elena secured her equipment and prepared to return to shore. The 5,400-meter shot had taken less than 7 seconds to execute, but its implications would ripple through military doctrine and training protocols for years to come. As she walked toward the ship's gangway, Elena reflected on the strange trajectory that had brought her from childhood dreams of marine biology to this moment of military breakthrough. The path hadn't been linear or predictable, but it had led to exactly where she was supposed to be, a place where impossible challenges became routine problems solved through the application of skill, determination, and absolute commitment to precision. The shot was over, but the story was just beginning. 3 months after the shot that redefined impossible, Elena found herself standing in a classroom at the newly established Extreme Range Marksmanship Training Center at Camp Pendleton, watching 12 hand-selected Marines attempt to apply the techniques she'd developed through years of intuitive experimentation and disciplined practice. The irony wasn't lost on her. The woman who'd always performed best in solitary focus was now responsible for teaching others to achieve what most people still considered impossible. The students were exceptional by any conventional standard. Each had demonstrated superior marksmanship abilities in conventional training, compiled outstanding service records, and volunteered for assignment to a program that promised months of intensive instruction with no guarantee of success. But Elena could see in their eyes the same mixture of ambition and uncertainty that she'd felt before her first combat deployment, the recognition that theoretical excellence and practical achievement existed in entirely different realms of human experience. "The mathematics are straightforward," Elena explained to the class, gesturing toward the ballistic equations displayed on the whiteboard behind her. "Bullet trajectory follows predictable laws of physics. Wind drift can be calculated if you understand atmospheric conditions. The complex part isn't intellectual. It's learning to trust your body's ability to execute calculations that your conscious mind can't process quickly enough to be useful." Sergeant Williams, a veteran sniper from Elena's old unit, raised her hand with the respectful persistence that characterized serious professional questions. "Sergeant Williams, how do you distinguish between confidence and overconfidence when attempting shots that ranges where small errors become catastrophic failures?" The question struck at the heart of what Elena had been struggling to articulate throughout the first weeks of instruction.
How could she teach intuitive judgment that had developed through years of experience under conditions that couldn't be easily replicated in training environments? How could she transfer skills that seemed to exist below the threshold of conscious awareness? Overconfidence announces itself, Elena replied, drawing on the psychological insights she'd developed through consultation with military performance specialists. When you start thinking about the shot instead of just making it, when you find yourself calculating probabilities instead of simply executing learned procedures, you've moved from confidence into territory where failure becomes likely. Dr. Kim had become a regular presence at the training center, refining her atmospheric modeling software based on data collected from hundreds of training shots attempted under various environmental conditions. Her research had confirmed that Elena's original demonstration wasn't merely exceptional individual performance, it represented the upper boundary of what was technically achievable by human shooters using currently available equipment and training methods.
Martinez's observation had prompted Elena to reconsider her own relationship with extreme-range shooting. Perhaps the 5,400-meter shot hadn't been simply the result of superior training and equipment. Perhaps it had represented the absolute boundary of human capability under specific environmental conditions that might not be reproducible on demand. Dr. Kim's research supported this hypothesis. Her analysis of atmospheric data from Elena's original demonstration had revealed a unique combination of temperature gradients, wind patterns, and barometric pressure that created unusually stable conditions for extreme-range ballistics. The shot had been technically perfect, but it had also benefited from environmental factors that occurred infrequently and unpredictably. We may have witnessed a perfect convergence of human capability and environmental conditions, Dr. Kim had explained during a research presentation to senior Marine Corps leadership. Elena's demonstration proves that 5,400-meter shots are possible, but reproducible success at that range would require either significant technological advances or environmental conditions that can't be guaranteed in operational settings. The realization had been both relieving and disappointing for Elena. On one hand, it explained why her teaching efforts had plateaued around 4,200 meters for most students. They were approaching the practical limits of human performance rather than simply requiring additional instruction. On the other hand, it suggested that her original demonstration might have been as much about favorable circumstances as superior ability. Admiral Richardson had visited the training center 6 months after Elena's demonstration, his presence creating the kind of formal tension that always accompanied senior leadership inspections. But Elena had been surprised by the Admiral's apparent satisfaction with the program's results, despite their failure to produce students capable of matching her original 5,400-meter achievement. "What you've accomplished here exceeds my expectations," Richardson had told Elena during a private conversation after observing student training exercises. "When I initially opposed your demonstration, I was concerned that we were chasing individual excellence that couldn't be systematized for broader military application. But this program has proven that extreme-range capabilities can be developed reliably, even if not every shooter will match your specific achievements." Richardson's comment had highlighted the tension between individual excellence and institutional capability that had shaped Elena's experience throughout the development of the training program. Her personal achievement had been extraordinary, but its value to the military lay in what it revealed about the potential for extending conventional marksmanship capabilities rather than in creating additional shooters who could duplicate her specific performance. The program had also attracted attention from other military services and allied nations interested in developing similar capabilities. Elena found herself consulting on training programs for Army Special Operations units, Navy SEAL teams, and foreign military personnel whose governments had requested access to American extreme-range marksmanship techniques. Each consultation reinforced Elena's understanding that her original demonstration had been less important for its specific technical achievement than for its proof that conventional assumptions about human limitations might be incorrect. The 5,400-meter shot had opened institutional imagination to possibilities that had previously been dismissed as impossible, creating space for innovation and experimentation that extended far beyond marksmanship training. Dr. Kim had parlayed her research into a comprehensive study of human performance under extreme conditions, examining not just marksmanship, but other military specialties where individual capability seemed to approach theoretical limits. Her work suggested that Elena's achievement was part of a broader pattern of human adaptation that occurred when exceptional individuals were provided with optimal training, equipment, and environmental conditions. Elena represents what's possible at the intersection of human potential and technological capability, Dr. Kim had explained during a lecture at the Naval War College. Elena's demonstration doesn't just advance marksmanship doctrine. It provides a template for approaching other challenges where conventional wisdom about human limitations may be constraining innovation. Elena had been promoted to Master Gunnery Sergeant in recognition of her contributions to military training and doctrine, though she sometimes wondered whether the promotion reflected
her teaching abilities, or simply the institutional desire to retain personnel whose unique capabilities provided strategic advantages. The rank brought additional responsibilities that pulled her away from direct instruction, requiring her to focus more on program development and administrative coordination than on the hands-on training she preferred. But the promotion had also provided Elena with influence over the direction of extreme-range marksmanship development, allowing her to emphasize patient skill development rather than the quick results that administrative pressures might otherwise have demanded. She'd used her position to advocate for training approaches that prioritized psychological resilience and technical fundamentals over dramatic demonstrations that might impress observers while failing to develop reproducible capabilities. The students who graduated from Elena's program carried with them not just advanced marksmanship skills, but also a transformed understanding of what was possible when human determination encountered challenges that seemed impossible. Most would never attempt shots at the ranges Elena had demonstrated, but all had learned to approach technical challenges with the systematic preparation and absolute commitment that distinguished exceptional performance from mere competence. As Elena stood in the training center classroom, watching Sergeant Williams execute a perfect shot at 3,800 meters, she reflected on the unexpected trajectory that had led from her father's weekend shooting lessons to this moment of institutional transformation. The 5,400-meter shot had taken 7 seconds to complete, but its implications had created changes that would influence military training and doctrine for decades to come. The impossible had become routine, not through magic or supernatural ability, but through the patient application of human intelligence to challenges that required nothing more than absolute commitment to precision. And in proving that impossible was often just another word for untested, Elena had discovered something equally important, that teaching others to attempt the impossible was even more satisfying than achieving it herself. 5 years later, Master Gunnery Sergeant Elena Vasquez stood at the edge of the cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean where her father had once taught her to shoot tin cans with a .22 rifle. But now she watched through binoculars as her former student, Staff Sergeant Martinez, prepared to attempt a 4,600-meter shot from the deck of the USS Constellation. The morning fog was beginning to lift from the water's surface, revealing the distant target platform that bobbed gently in the swells, and Elena felt the familiar tightness in her chest that accompanied moments when other people's impossible dreams balanced on the edge of reality. The radio crackled with communication between Martinez and his spotter, their voices carrying the calm professionalism that Elena had worked to instill in all her students. The understanding that extreme-range marksmanship was ultimately about routine application of exceptional skills, rather than dramatic demonstrations of supernatural ability. Martinez had spent 3 years in the training program, progressing through the careful curriculum Elena had developed to build both technical proficiency and psychological resilience necessary for precision shooting under pressure. Wind holding steady at 12 knots from the southwest, atmospheric conditions within acceptable parameters, requesting permission to engage. Elena keyed her own radio to respond, though she knew that Martinez no longer needed her guidance for shots within his demonstrated capabilities. Permission granted. Execute when ready. The shot that followed was technically perfect. Martinez's breathing settled into the meditative rhythm Elena had taught him. His body found absolute stability despite the ship's movement, and his trigger squeeze released the bullet with the mechanical precision that distinguished trained shooters from those who simply possessed natural talent. The bullet's flight time across 4,600 meters was just over 6 seconds, and when the metallic ring of impact carried across the water, Elena felt the satisfaction that came from watching a student achieve something he'd once believed impossible. But Martinez's success represented more than individual achievement. In the 5 years since Elena's original demonstration, the Extreme Range Marksmanship Training Center had graduated 127 students who could consistently engage targets beyond 3,500 meters, fundamentally changing how the military approached precision shooting in contested environments. The program had proven that exceptional capabilities could be developed systematically, given sufficient time, resources, and commitment to patient skill development.
Dr. Kim had leveraged her research into a position at the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, where she continued developing atmospheric modeling software that supported not just marksmanship training, but also artillery, missile guidance, and other applications where understanding environmental conditions was critical for precision engagement. Her work had confirmed that Elena's original 5,400-meter shot remained at the theoretical limit of human capability with current technology, but had also identified technological improvements that might extend effective range even further. Elena's demonstration opened institutional imagination to possibilities we hadn't previously considered, Dr. Kim had explained during a recent conference presentation. But more importantly, it established systematic approaches to developing human capabilities that seem to approach theoretical limits. The methodology we developed for extreme-range marksmanship has applications across multiple military specialties where individual performance determines mission success. Admiral Richardson had retired from active duty 6 months earlier, but not before implementing institutional changes that reflected his evolved understanding of human potential in military applications. His final efficiency report on Elena had included language that became legendary within the marksmanship community. Master Gunnery Sergeant Vasquez has redefined the possible through disciplined pursuit of technical excellence. Her achievements represent not just individual capability, but institutional transformation that will influence military doctrine for decades. Elena's parents had attended Richardson's retirement ceremony, where Roberto had been recognized for his role in developing the foundational skills that had enabled Elena's later achievements. The recognition had been deeply meaningful for Roberto, who had spent his career focused on training Marines for conventional combat applications, without imagining that his weekend shooting lessons with his daughter would eventually contribute to fundamental advances in military capability. Everything I taught Elena about patience and precision came from lessons the Corps taught me about attention to detail and commitment to excellence, Roberto had said during his brief remarks at the ceremony. But Elena took those lessons further than I ever imagined possible, proving that the next generation can build on what we've learned and achieve things we never thought to attempt. The training center had evolved beyond marksmanship instruction to become a research facility for human performance under extreme conditions. Elena worked with sports psychologists, physiologists, and cognitive scientists to understand what distinguished exceptional performers from those who plateaued at conventional levels of competence. The research had implications that extended far beyond military applications, influencing training approaches in professional athletics, emergency medical services, and other fields where individual capability determined life or death outcomes. 10 years later, Elena had been assigned to the Pentagon as a senior advisor on precision engagement doctrine,
a position that required her to spend more time in conference rooms than on firing ranges, but allowed her to influence policy decisions that affected thousands of military personnel worldwide. The irony wasn't lost on her that the woman who had always performed best in solitary focus now spent her days facilitating meetings between senior officers, defense contractors, and academic researchers who were developing the next generation of extreme-range capabilities. The technology had advanced significantly since her original demonstration. New rifle systems incorporated real-time atmospheric sensors. Ballistic computers could process environmental
data instantaneously, and ammunition had been developed specifically for extreme-range applications. Students in the current training program could achieve accuracy at ranges that would have been impossible during Elena's era, though they still required the psychological preparation and technical discipline that she had emphasized throughout her teaching career. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez, he'd been promoted twice since Elena had first taught him to shoot beyond conventional ranges, now commanded the training center and had developed a curriculum that prepared students for combat applications of extreme-range marksmanship. His program emphasized tactical integration rather than demonstration shooting, ensuring that graduates could apply their skills effectively in operational environments where perfect conditions couldn't be guaranteed. Elena's legacy isn't the specific distance of her record shot, Martinez explained to new students during orientation sessions. Her legacy is the systematic approach to developing capabilities that most people dismiss as impossible. She proved that human potential is limited more by imagination than by actual physical constraints. But she also proved that realizing that potential requires disciplined preparation and absolute commitment to excellence. Elena had married Marcus 3 years earlier, in a small ceremony on Coronado Beach, where they'd first discussed the possibility of attempting the 5,400-meter shot that had changed both their careers. Their relationship had been built on shared understanding of precision shooting as both technical discipline and philosophical practice, and their partnership continued to influence how the military approached training for high-stress, high-precision applications. They'd purchased a house in the mountains east of San Diego, where Elena had built a private shooting range that allowed her to maintain her skills while providing a retreat from the administrative responsibilities that increasingly dominated her professional life. She still shot daily, though her focus had shifted from extending maximum range to exploring the psychological and spiritual dimensions of marksmanship that she'd discovered during her years of teaching others to attempt the impossible. 15 years later, Elena's retirement ceremony was held on the deck of the USS Defiance, the same ship where she'd made the shot that had defined her career and changed military doctrine regarding human limitations in precision engagement. The assembled crowd included students she'd trained, officers whose careers had been influenced by her innovations, and family members who had supported her journey from curious child with natural shooting ability to institutional legend whose achievements continued to inspire new generations of military personnel. Admiral Chen, Marcus's daughter who had followed her father into military service and risen to flag rank through excellence in naval special operations, delivered the keynote address that placed Elena's contributions in historical context. Master Gunnery Sergeant Vasquez proved that impossible is often just another word for untested, Chen said, her voice carrying across the harbor where Elena's shot had first challenged conventional understanding of human capability. But more importantly, she demonstrated that breakthrough achievements result from patient application of disciplined principles rather than dramatic leaps of faith. Elena's retirement gifts included a custom rifle system that incorporated all the technological advances that had been developed since her original demonstration, though she knew she would probably never attempt shots at the ranges that had defined her earlier career. Her current interests focused more on writing and teaching civilian marksmanship programs that emphasized the psychological benefits of precision shooting rather than its military applications. Dr. Kim, now in her 70s but still actively researching human performance under extreme conditions, had traveled from Washington for the ceremony.
Her presentation included analysis showing that Elena's original 5,400-meter shot remained technically optimal given atmospheric conditions that day. No combination of improved technology and training had yet produced a shot that exceeded its technical precision under similar circumstances. Elena achieved something that represented the absolute convergence of human capability, technological possibility, and environmental conditions. But her real contribution was proving that such convergence was possible, opening institutional imagination to possibilities that hadn't been previously considered. The students she trained, the doctrine she influenced, and the technological developments her demonstration inspired have had impact far beyond any individual shot, regardless of its technical perfection.
Roberto, now 83 but still attending every military ceremony that honored his daughter's achievements, had been invited to fire the ceremonial final shot of Elena's active duty career. He used the same rifle model he'd carried during his own service, engaging a target at the conventional range of 300 meters that would have seemed impossibly challenging to most civilian shooters, but represented routine competence for anyone trained in the system Elena had developed. My daughter took the lessons I taught her about patience and precision and carried them further than I ever imagined possible, Roberto said during his brief remarks. But the foundation was always the same, understanding that excellence results from daily commitment to doing difficult things correctly, especially when no one is watching to verify your effort. Elena's final official act was presenting graduation certificates to the latest class of extreme-range marksmanship students, young Marines and sailors who would carry her techniques and philosophy to assignments around the world where precision shooting might mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Many of them had been children when Elena first demonstrated that 5,400-meter shots were possible, but all had been shaped by training programs that reflected her understanding of human potential and systematic skill development. 20 years later, Elena stood in her mountain workshop, where she handcrafted custom rifles for competitive shooters and law enforcement agencies that required precision beyond conventional commercial availability. The work satisfied her desire for technical excellence while allowing her to pass on the mechanical skills that had supported her shooting achievements throughout her career. Each rifle represented months of careful development, testing, and refinement that reflected the same attention to detail she'd brought to preparing for impossible shots. Her workshop walls displayed photographs from her military career, the USS Defiance demonstration that had changed her life, graduation ceremonies for students who had gone on to distinguished careers in military and law enforcement, meetings with senior officials who had implemented policy changes based on her recommendations. But the images that meant most to her were simple snapshots of students achieving their first successful shots at extended range, capturing the moment when impossible became routine through application of learned skills. Marcus worked alongside her, applying the same systematic approach to rifle construction that he'd brought to spotting duties during their military partnership. Their collaboration continued to produce innovations in precision shooting technology, though their current focus emphasized civilian applications rather than military development. They'd founded a company that manufactured custom equipment for competitive shooters, hunters, and law enforcement agencies that required accuracy beyond conventional specifications. The mountain location provided opportunities for shooting at ranges that had once seemed extraordinary but now felt routine. Elena maintained her skills through daily practice sessions that emphasized consistency rather than maximum distance, understanding that her current goals involved maintaining capability rather than extending it further. She could still engage targets at ranges that most people considered impossible, but her satisfaction came from the meditative qualities of precision shooting rather than from demonstrating exceptional performance. Her autobiography, Impossible is Untested, had become required reading in military training programs worldwide,
Though Elena was sometimes uncomfortable with the way her story had been transformed into inspiration for people facing challenges that had nothing to do with marksmanship. The book emphasized systematic preparation and psychological discipline rather than natural talent, but readers often focused on the dramatic demonstration rather than on the years of patient skill development that had made it possible. The shot that defined my career took 7 seconds to execute, but those 7 seconds represented 15 years of preparation, thousands of hours of practice, and absolute commitment to doing difficult things correctly under challenging conditions. The distance wasn't what made the shot special. The distance was simply the measure of how thoroughly I had prepared for that specific moment. 25 years later, the Elena Vasquez Marksmanship Center at Camp Pendleton had become the premier training facility for precision shooting instruction, attracting students from military services,
Enforcement agencies, and competitive shooting programs from around the world. The facility incorporated technological advances that Elena could never have imagined during her active duty career, but the training philosophy remained grounded in the principles she had developed through trial and error during her teaching years. Elena served on the center's advisory board, reviewing curriculum development and consulting on research projects that continued exploring human performance under extreme conditions. Her involvement ensured that training programs maintained focus on psychological preparation and systematic skill development rather than pursuing technological solutions that might shortcut the disciplined approach necessary for reliable performance under pressure. The current record for confirmed extreme-range shooting stood at 5,847 meters, achieved by one of Elena's former students using equipment that incorporated decades of technological advancement since her original demonstration. But Elena felt no disappointment about having her record surpassed. She understood that her real achievement had been proven that such distances were possible for human shooters, opening institutional imagination to possibilities that had previously been dismissed as impossible. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the student who had broken Elena's record, had visited Elena's mountain workshop to present her with the bullet used in his record shot. "This wouldn't have been possible without the foundation you established," Rodriguez had said during the presentation. "Every extreme-range shot builds on the systematic approach you developed for achieving what other people thought was impossible." Elena kept the bullet on her workshop desk, where it served as a reminder that her contributions had been institutional rather than individual. The specific distance of her demonstration shot mattered less than the training systems, psychological techniques, and technological developments that had emerged from proving that human performance was achievable through systematic preparation. 30 years later, Elena's 80th birthday celebration was held at the Marksmanship Center that bore her name, where 3 generations of students had learned to attempt shots that previous generations had dismissed as impossible. The assembled crowd included former students who now commanded training programs around the world, researchers whose work had been inspired by her demonstration of human potential, and family members who had supported her journey from curious child to institutional legend whose influence continued shaping military doctrine decades after her retirement. Marcus, now 82, but still maintaining the steady hands that had made him an exceptional spotter, stood beside Elena as speakers recounted the impact of her career on military training and human performance research. Their partnership had endured through active duty, civilian careers, and retirement, bound together by shared understanding that precision shooting represented a pathway to exploring the boundaries of human capability under extreme conditions. The celebration included a demonstration by current students who could achieve accuracy at ranges that would have been unimaginable during Elena's era, using technology that incorporated decades of advancement in ballistics, atmospheric modeling, and precision manufacturing. But the fundamental principles remained unchanged: patience, discipline,
systematic preparation, and absolute commitment to executing learned procedures correctly under challenging conditions. Dr. Kim, now in her 90s but still intellectually sharp, had prepared a presentation analyzing the long-term impact of Elena's original demonstration on military innovation and human performance research. Her analysis showed that Elena's achievement was never about the specific distance of her shot. Her achievement was proving that human beings could perform at levels that exceeded conventional expectations when provided with systematic training, advanced technology, and absolute commitment to excellence. That proof opened possibilities that continue influencing how we approach challenges in fields far beyond military marksmanship.
Elena's grandchildren, who had grown up hearing stories about their grandmother's impossible shot but had never fully understood its significance, listened with growing appreciation as speakers explained how a single demonstration had changed institutional understanding of human potential. The youngest, Maria Elena, now 12 and already showing interest in precision shooting under Roberto's patient instruction, represented the fourth generation of the Vasquez family to discover that impossible often meant simply untested. The ceremonial rifle presentation included the weapon Elena had used for her original 5,400-meter demonstration, now a museum piece that represented a pivotal moment in military history. The rifle showed the wear of thousands of practice shots, the careful maintenance that had kept it functioning perfectly throughout Elena's career, and the modifications that reflected her systematic approach to equipment optimization. "This rifle fired the shot that changed everything," said General Martinez, Elena's former student who now commanded Marine Corps training and education. But the rifle was just a tool. The real innovation was Elena's understanding that human capability could exceed conventional limitations through disciplined application of systematic training principles. That understanding continues influencing how we develop personnel for challenges that seem impossible until someone proves they're simply difficult. Elena's response to the celebration was characteristically understated, reflecting the humility that had marked her approach to extraordinary achievement throughout her career. She thanked the assembled crowd for their support and recognition, but emphasized that her contributions had been possible only through collaboration with exceptional people who had shared her commitment to exploring human potential. "The shot that people remember took 7 seconds to execute," Elena said during her brief remarks. But those 7 seconds represented the work of hundreds of people over many years, trainers who taught me fundamental skills, engineers who developed reliable equipment, researchers who provided scientific understanding of ballistics and human performance, and students who proved that what I demonstrated could be systematized for broader application. She paused, looking out over the faces of people whose careers had been influenced by her demonstration that impossible was often just another word for untested. The real achievement wasn't hitting a target at 5,400 meters. The real achievement was proving that human beings can accomplish extraordinary things when they're willing to commit absolutely to systematic preparation for challenges that other people dismiss as impossible. 35 years later, Elena passed away peacefully in her mountain home, surrounded by family members who had supported her journey from curious child to institutional legend, whose influence continued shaping military doctrine and human performance research around the world. Her death marked the end of an era, but also the continuation of principles and training methods that had transformed how military organizations approach the development of exceptional capabilities. Marcus spoke at her memorial service, held at the Naval Academy where Elena had first encountered the systematic approach to military excellence that had shaped her understanding of human potential. His eulogy emphasized Elena's commitment to proving that extraordinary achievement resulted from disciplined application of learned principles rather than supernatural ability or pure natural talent. "Elena taught us that impossible is often just another word for untested," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the chapel where Elena's former students and colleagues had gathered to honor her memory.
But more importantly, she showed us that testing the impossible requires systematic preparation, absolute commitment to excellence, and willingness to attempt things that other people dismiss without investigation.
Understanding that marksmanship training could teach discipline and confidence that applied to challenges far beyond shooting ranges. Elena's autobiography remained required reading in military training programs worldwide, though new editions included commentary from researchers who had studied the long-term impact of her demonstration on institutional approaches to human performance development. The book's core message, that systematic preparation could enable achievement of goals that seemed impossible, had influenced training approaches in fields ranging from emergency medicine to space exploration. 40 years later, the 40th anniversary of Elena's 5,400-meter demonstration was commemorated with a symposium at the Naval War College that brought together researchers, military leaders, and performance specialists to examine the long-term impact of her achievement on human performance research and military doctrine. The event highlighted how Elena's proof of concept had influenced not just marksmanship training, but also selection criteria for elite units, psychological preparation for high-stress occupations, and technological development across multiple industries. Dr. Sarah Kim's daughter, now Dr. Jennifer Kim, and the leading researcher in human performance under extreme conditions, presented an analysis showing that Elena's demonstration had been a pivotal moment in understanding the relationship between systematic training and exceptional achievement. Her research confirmed that Elena's approach to developing extreme-range marksmanship capabilities had provided a template for approaching other challenges where human performance seemed to approach theoretical limits. Elena Vasquez proved that human potential is limited more by institutional imagination than by actual physical constraints, Dr. Jennifer Kim explained during her presentation. Her systematic approach to developing extreme-range marksmanship capabilities has been adapted for training programs in fields as diverse as surgery, aviation, and emergency response, where individual performance under extreme conditions determines life-or-death outcomes. The symposium included demonstrations by current military personnel who could achieve accuracy at ranges that exceeded Elena's original record, using technology that incorporated 5 decades of advancement in precision shooting equipment. But the presenters emphasized that technological improvement alone hadn't been sufficient. Success still required the systematic approach to training and psychological preparation that Elena had developed through years of teaching students to attempt the impossible. General Rodriguez, Elena's former student, who now served as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, delivered the keynote address that placed Elena's contributions in historical context. Master Gunnery Sergeant Vasquez changed how the military thinks about human potential, Rodriguez said. She proved that breakthrough capabilities could be developed systematically, that extraordinary achievement resulted from disciplined application of learned principles rather than pure natural talent. The current world record for confirmed extreme-range shooting stood at 6,247 meters, achieved by a former student of Elena's program using equipment that incorporated decades of technological advancement in precision shooting equipment. But military historians noted that the specific distance mattered less than the institutional changes that had resulted from Elena's original demonstration. Training programs that emphasized systematic skill development, selection criteria that identified personnel with potential for exceptional performance, and technological development focused on supporting human capability rather than replacing it. 50 years later, the Elena Vasquez Museum of Military Excellence opened on the 50th anniversary of her demonstration, housed in a building at Camp Pendleton that overlooked the Pacific Ocean where she had first proven that 5,400-meter shots were possible for human shooters. The museum's exhibits traced the evolution of extreme-range marksmanship from Elena's original demonstration through current capabilities that exceeded her achievement while maintaining the systematic training approach she had developed. The museum's centerpiece was an interactive exhibit that allowed visitors to experience the atmospheric conditions, psychological pressure, and technical precision required for extreme-range shooting. The exhibit emphasized that Elena's achievement had resulted from years of patient preparation rather than a single moment of inspiration,
helping visitors understand that extraordinary performance in any field required systematic development of both technical skills and psychological resilience.
Maria Elena Vasquez Chen, Elena's great-granddaughter, and now a competitive shooter in her own right, served as the museum's director and continued developing educational programs that used marksmanship training to teach broader lessons about goal setting, systematic preparation, and psychological resilience. Her programs attracted students from around the world who were interested in applying Elena's principles to challenges in business, athletics, and academic achievement. "My great-grandmother's legacy isn't the specific distance of her record shot," Maria Elena explained during the museum's opening ceremony. "Her legacy is the understanding that human beings can achieve extraordinary things when they're willing to commit absolutely to systematic preparation for challenges that other people dismiss as impossible. That understanding has applications far beyond marksmanship." The museum's research library contained Elena's personal archives, including training notes, equipment specifications, and correspondence with students who had gone on to distinguished careers in military and civilian fields. Researchers continued studying Elena's systematic approach to developing exceptional capabilities, finding applications in fields ranging from medical training to space exploration, where individual performance under extreme conditions determined mission success. The final exhibit featured a recreation of the USS Defiance's deck, where Elena had made her historic shot, complete with the original rifle and atmospheric monitoring equipment. Visitors could experience the environmental conditions that had challenged Elena's demonstration while learning about the scientific principles that govern extreme-range ballistics. The exhibit concluded with Elena's own words about the relationship between individual achievement and institutional transformation. "Impossible is often just another word for untested, but testing the impossible requires more than courage or natural talent. It requires systematic preparation, absolute commitment to excellence, and willingness to spend years developing capabilities that other people dismiss without investigation. The shot that defined my career took 7 seconds to execute, but those 7 seconds represented a lifetime of preparation for the moment when preparation would meet opportunity under conditions that demanded perfect execution." The museum's guest book contained entries from visitors representing dozens of countries and professions, all expressing gratitude for Elena's demonstration that human potential could exceed conventional expectations through disciplined application of systematic training principles. Military personnel, competitive athletes, medical professionals, and students wrote about how Elena's example had inspired them to attempt challenges they had previously considered beyond their capabilities. As the sun set over the Pacific Ocean, where Elena had first proven that impossible shots were simply very difficult shots executed under challenging conditions, the museum's exhibits continued inspiring new generations of visitors to question their assumptions about human limitations and embrace systematic approaches to achieving goals that seemed impossible until someone proved they were simply untested. The bronze plaque at the museum's entrance bore Elena's final words about the relationship between individual achievement and institutional transformation. "We don't attempt impossible shots to prove they're possible. We attempt impossible shots to discover what becomes possible when impossible becomes routine." Below the inscription, in smaller text, appeared the words that had concluded her autobiography and continued inspiring people around the world to question conventional assumptions about human limitations. Subscribe to the channel, where silence is never forgotten.